So welcome everyone. What a joy to talk about my brother Peter Wallace. He gave me such a great gift in life, taking a young person who knew nothing and sending me to Maharishi, introducing me personally to Maharishi, which changed my life. So I owe everything to Peter and my older brother who got us all started in this direction. And it's such a pleasure to think of Peter and think of sending him off in the grandest possible way. So I'm going to start, because Peter was a great storyteller. So I'm going to start with Peter telling a little bit of his story. Everybody's probably seen the YouTube, but it's so dear and touching, and it captures a moment in the history of the movement which is sort of unknown. Nobody else was there except for Peter and Maharishi and Brahmachari Devendra. It was like that was a kind of a special moment in time. And it was a time that, you know, there were the early founders of the movement, there were all the people that came later, but this was kind of a unique moment where Peter had that experience with Maharishi and really made a big difference for many people. So I thought it would be fun to start with that first. So Jesse, when you're ready, can we start with the tape? This is a YouTube tape. Anybody can see it. There's some before, which I've cut out, and there's some after, which I've cut out, because I'm just trying to keep the time. But if you want to see the whole tape, it's on YouTube, Peter Wallace, you can see it. All right, let's go ahead.
63, she sent me to Maharishi in Rishikesh, and the way she did it was very interesting. She did it through notes and through visions and all. It was very complicated how she did it, but there was no doubt in my mind that that I was supposed to go see Maharishi in Rishikesh, and that was just as the year was changing to 64. So I just walked out on the street, and a car stopped and said, "Where are you going?" You know, and I said, "Going to Rishikesh." I said, "Come, we're going to Rishikesh. Come." Like it didn't have to wait a minute, not a minute. And so I just sort of traveled very lightly, no suitcase or anything. I just had a small bag with my sleeping bag and I had one change of clothing, you know, and so just a pair of khaki pants and a dress shirt. That's all short sleeve dress shirt. And so I got to Rishikesh at night. It was late, and I stayed at the Shivananda ashram. Shivananda had died the year before, which was sad for me because I really admired this great, huge saint. And but Swami Chidananda had taken over, and he was like, we were very close, and we stayed up all night talking and laughing. And he said, "Now you know Maharishi isn't in Rishikesh, and if he was coming, I would know, because I know everything in Rishikesh, you know." And I said, "Well, I just have to go because that's my inner, my inner direction." So he said, yes, we'll come back here and stay with me, and when you find out he isn't there." And so the next morning he arranged a boat for me to cross the Ganges, and then I walked down past Gita Bhavan and the other ashrams that pilgrims went to there, and past all the caves where all the saints stayed. The Rishikesh means caves for rishis, and there are many, many caves. And then to this big sandbar, and then for a mile across the sandbar, and then to this sign that said Shankaracharya Nagar in both English and Devanagari. So I just walked up the hill, and I went over to the gentlemen that were working there, very beautiful men, and I said, "I'm here to see Maharishi Mahesh Yogi," and they said, "Oh, no, he hasn't been here for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, We don't expect him. He would tell us if he was coming." And I said, "Well, that's fine." I said, "But I may just sit on this rock and have, we'll bring you some water, we'll bring you some fruits and stuff like that." So I sat there, and then a few minutes later, before they actually brought me any fruit, I had the water, a car, a small Fiat, came out of the jungle. I didn't even know there was a road back there. It's an old hunting preserve for the Maharajas. And car came out, and one of my best friends in this life was driving that car, was Brahmachari Devendra, and we became very close. But sitting next to him was Maharshi, and he said, "Come." Never a hello or goodbye or anything. Just come, and I followed him to his small house. It was before the ashram was really built, so it was much more like a hut. Small house, really, and one room. And so we went, and I spent 6 months there with Maharshi, and he didn't initiate me until about the 3rd month. So, but I was with him night and day, and we neither of us slept that much, and we mostly just meditated and greeted guests that came, and I was on the door, and I didn't realize what a privilege that was, to be like his secretary, and to carry the skin whenever we went out in the jungle to meet other saints, or if we were sitting by the river, and we had like the head of the Air Force, the general who was the top fighter pilot, or we had the head of all culture in India, who told wonderful stories about the great musicians and so on, and befriended us, and always very esteemed guests that were coming. And I would be on the door so that if 2 guests came at the same time, I could tell Maharshi, so-and-so is here, and he would say, yes, have him wait just a minute, tell him I'll be right with him, and deal with the person he was with. So it was a very lovely time for me, and I had lots of private time with Maharshi. And I remember one night we were sitting out by the Ganges. It's a big cliff, so it's way down, you know. We're up on Shankaracharya Nagars. It was like a little plateau. It's way above the river. And so one day he said, Peter, do you think that this meditation would ever really spread all over? And I realized it's a very important question, because he didn't usually ask my advice or anything like that, and I took it very seriously, and I knew that all the people that I'd ever told about meditation weren't interested, and so my first reaction was, no, they're not interested. It's very materialistic, very, no, they wouldn't be interested in this. And Maharshi seemed to then withdraw somewhat, and there was a period of quietness. And there was an inner dialogue going on in my heart that went, why can't you open up your mind? Why can't you see what he's trying to ask you? There must be some possibility. There must be some way. And then all of a sudden I blurted out, hula hoops. Yes, this was in 1964. Hula hoops, I said. And Maharshi said, so polite, so sweet, so compassionate. He said, what is hula hoops? I said, no, it doesn't matter, Maharshi. I was embarrassed then. I couldn't explain it to him, so I just said, no, it's not important what it is. It's just that something can start in California, in my country, and it can go all the way across till it reaches New York, and then something can start in New York and come all the way across, and it's very amazing how fast things can change in my country. And he seemed that's what he was asking for, that's what he was interested in. And then he said, do you think this meditation could do that? And I thought for a while, and I wanted to give him an honest answer. And I thought about my devotion, the puja he had done for me, and how beautiful it was, and the long meditations that he put me into, 3 weeks of solid meditation. So, and I thought about the results of how I opened up and how so I thought, Maharshi, it could spread, but if it was dependent on the puja, then I'm not sure that it could spread that quickly, because it's complicated for very many reasons, and it's so culturally different, and so Maharshi went quiet. He went inside, and he was quiet for quite some time, and I just went inside with him like that. And then when he opened his eyes, whenever he would open his eyes, my eyes would just open like a cue. And then I looked over at him, and he says, "No, we need the puja." And I took that as, I said, well, it could be harder, you know. And later, when I became a teacher in the late 60s in Rishikesh, I realized that everybody that I'd ever taught meditation to, and I taught for most of my life, got it. And they always got it right away. And it was always because the puja connected them to this great tradition. So I learned the importance of the puja and so on. Other things that happened there that were very interesting, sometimes he would go out and he would go on trips to meet people all around India, and then he would come back and then they would follow him back. And during those times I asked him permission to do different things, like meditate in Tatwala Baba's cave with Tatwala Baba, or go to Yoga Vashista's cave up on the Ganges, or maybe make a pilgrimage to some place or something like that. And he would always give me permission to do that. I think the most interesting thing that happened to me, other than all these personal things with Maharshi, was the time that I said, you know, Maharshi, I was with Ma all last year, and I traveled with her, and then she sent me here, and then I never spoke to her again. And don't you think it would be good? He was just saying, I have to go out and I can't take you with me because it's all Indians meeting and so on like that. And I said, no, I completely understand. But what about if I went to see Ma, and I heard she was in Hardwar, which was close to Rishikesh, and just said goodbye and explained to her what I was doing? He said that would be very good. And I didn't realize how much he knew Ma, because he knew Ma through Gurudev. The two great saints were the two great saints of India, and Ma was the guru to Indira Gandhi and to the Nehrus and so on, along with Gurudev. They were the spiritual leaders of India. So this was a very big thing, and bigger than I ever realized. And Maharshi's role was much bigger than I ever realized too, because he would never let me touch his feet, you know, which was a tradition in India that you would touch the feet of a great saint. And he taught me meditation, and he allowed me to find him and Ma within myself, so that I was never cut off from their presence. And so he thought it would be a good idea if I used that time. Yes, come join me.
Okay.
He thought it would be a really good idea if I used that time to go and give my farewells to Ma. And so I did, and I took this wonderful trip down to Hardwar. But I was really very confused when I got there, because usually I could have darshan of Ma, and it was pretty much not private, but there'd be maybe 20, 30, 40 people there. But at this time, the whole driveway was filled with limousines, and they all had diplomatic flags on them. And some of them were the Indian Prime Minister, one of them was the Danish consulate. I mean, there were devotees of Ma from all over the world there, and they were all important. And when I got inside, I was very shy, and I sat back on in the very back. It was so crowded anyway, there was no place to sit. So I sat against the back wall, which was kind of a walkway, and tried not to block it, and went into samadhi, which I always did when I was with Ma, and was gone completely, until I heard Ma's secretary, Chitra, saying, Peter, and it was all across this crowd. And I also have to tell you that on the stage next to Ma were the greatest saints in India, including the most powerful Dandi sannyasis from Gurudev, and also other great saints that were famous throughout India. And they were all there for one reason, and that was to bow down to Anandamayi Ma. So, and all the great politicians that were there, and later I heard that Indira Gandhi was there, and all the president of India, and so on. And I didn't even know that, but when Chitra was calling my name, and she said, "Ma wants to know where you've been," and I thought, Ma knows where I've been. She's been with me every day, every moment. How could she not know where I've been? And then I realized it was a show. It was theatrical, and so I stood up in the aisle, and I stood straight as I could, and I said very dramatically, "I have been to Rishikesh to see Anandamayi Ma. I've been to Rishikesh to see Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and to learn transcendental meditation." And there was quite a ruckus on the stage, particularly with the saints and everything, who probably had been around Maharishi for the 2 years that he'd been with Gurudev, and there might have been some jealousy or so on, but I don't know. But they were concerned that Maharishi was traveling around the world. He'd done so several times, and he was teaching this most precious technique, which you have to deserve to get. You can't just show up, So, in the tradition of masters, they would test the student before they would just give them the technique. Sometimes test their patience. And so, what happened was this turned into a giant discussion which involved not only the politicians but all the saints that were on the stage. And it went for some time, and I was standing there shifting from one foot to the other, kind of thinking, what have I done? And then suddenly Ma just put up a hand, and you could have heard a pin drop. It was absolutely silent. And because, as I said, they were all there to worship Anandamayi Ma, and because Gurudev had passed, she was the embodiment of God for everyone. And so she just held up her hand, and then she started to talk. And my Hindi isn't that good, but later on Chitra caught up with me and told me everything that was said. And what was said was so beautiful. What was said was that Maharishi wasn't out there for himself, and he wasn't trying to win, to become success in the world, but that he was just doing the very soul and will of Gurudev in every motion and every thought and every action that he took, that he was only just following Gurudev's idea that the world was in a
It goes on, and you're welcome to see it on YouTube. And there's a lovely tape that Maharishi made. It's the Seagull tape. I don't know how many people have seen the Seagull tape, but he actually talks about Peter, and he tells how he sent Peter down to a cave to meditate. And, Peter was wanting to be a sannyasi, and he had his robes, he had yellow robes and his beard, and he was going to retire from the world. He was only, he was young, in his 20s. And then Maharishi had him, kept sending him down to this cave to meditate longer and longer. And finally, one moment, Peter came out of the cave, came back to Maharishi, says, "Maharishi, I want to go back to school." Maharishi said, "Very good, very good." So, that was his experience. So it is Peter's birthday today, just so we know. And he'd be 81 years old, and 3 of his beautiful children are here. So we have a whole evening of different guests that are going to be speaking about Peter. And so I'm going to start off with my brother Bill. My brother Bill really was the leader of our family. He got us going into everything. There's his lovely wife, Velma. And Bill was a great. There's Laura on the other side. I guess so. Yeah, his daughter Laura on the other side. Hey, we go. Nope. There we go. All right, good. So, and Billy really led us, and he was he was a beatnik before there were hippies. He was a real avant-garde person and led us into the world. And so, and Billy really did a lot to help Peter in his last days. So, Billy, go ahead. We'd love to hear from you.
Am I here?
Yep, we can hear you perfectly.
Hello, everybody.
Yep, we're on a big screen for everyone.
It's very nice to be with you all. I'm so glad Peter was able to pass so many years with all of you because he was in a great environment and he found a lot of happiness to meditate. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the early years. It started when we graduated from high school. I went off to Europe to study at the University of Vienna, and Peter came and visited me there. And we roamed around, and we were really interested in culture and in books, and we loved the existentialism, and so Peter went off to Paris, and I stayed on in Vienna, and then I came back to the United States to work for a while. And Peter introduced me to this incredible coffee house up in Malibu. It was like a private club. And I never had such a good time, and I was so grateful for him. He was the youngest member, and all these super intellectuals would come there from Hollywood writers and everything. And then we had a great time together. And so then I went off to Europe again, and on my way back the next time from Europe, I read this book on the ship called Zen and the Art of Archery. And lo and behold, when I got home, Peter says, let's go to the Zen temple and meditate. And so we did. It was incredible, just incredible. They'd hit you on the back if you moved. So we learned all about meditation that was the first time. And then we went up to Big Sur, and we were right in the middle of all the 60s, early 60s, Bohemian American movement. And like Jack Kerouac's The Dharma Bums influenced us. And so we had a wonderful time, just incredible. We adventured and adventured. He was a real romantic person. He was a spiritual romantic. And we did everything that was interesting and fun. And finally, I got back to Los Angeles, and we both did. And we met this meditation teacher who was Yogananda's last kind of ordained teacher. And he introduced us to Kriya Yoga. And my father and my mother did it also. And we had the happiest time for a couple of years. It was just a golden period. And that's when Peter went to India. And I can't remember the sequence of events, but during that time, Maharishi came, and we went to his meeting, and we had a nice talk with him. He was so easygoing and fun and laughing and all the time. And I said, well, Peter and I both suggested that, the young people, our generation was really open to this, and that they would go places with it. And he was very interested. And then after that time, I got drafted in the Army and went to Korea, and came back, and my father died and the family broke up, and Peter went back east, and I didn't see him for many years or didn't talk with him at all. And in the last 3 years, after when COVID started, I started calling him every day because I was worried about him being alone. And so we went over our whole lives, every little tidbit of experiences we went. He had the best memory for old times, long ago. So we reviewed our whole lives, and then a few months ago we went and saw him, and he was pretty miserable in this home, and now he's died. He used to say all the time, he used to love to say, in sort of a pirate's language, the dead, them's the lucky ones. Well, now he's lucky. So that's about all I have to say, and I want to tell all of you in your wonderful organization, and I'm so glad that you all got everybody all over the place to meditate because that's such a blessing. And I hope you guys have lots and lots of bliss. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. They actually met Maharishi in 1962, and the guy that they went to, he lived right down the street from us, the teacher from Yogananda, Bob Raymer, who Billy was very, very close to and still is close to his family, and he went to both Catalina courses. So there was a lot of fate working here in getting Peter and eventually me to Maharishi, starting from 1962. So thank you, Billy. Now we're going to go on to Monty Guild. And now Monty is, you got to go back in time here. Monty knew Peter when we were very young. We knew the whole family very young. So long before meditation. And Monty was a junior Olympic skier. And my mom used to take Monty and Peter up to Mammoth from Los Angeles, and I'd be in the front seat and they'd be in the back. I mean, they were like much older than me, so there was hardly any interaction. And Monty really has known Peter for a long, long time. And he's been such a dear friend. He had such a huge impact on the movement. Our domes here today are really a result of Monty's great contribution. He was so close to Maharishi and made such a big difference in this world. So just some happy thoughts from Monty about Peter. Thank you, Monty.
Jay, good day. Thanks for having me. What a joy to talk about Peter and you and your contributions to the world. Met Peter when I was 12 or 13. We were classmates in junior high school, new school, and we didn't know anybody in the school, either one of us. So we immediately bonded. He was tall, charming, handsome, well-liked by everybody, and quite a lovely person. Everyone loved Peter. And we found out we both liked to ski. So Peter and my dad would drive me and my brother skiing a lot. And it became a Wallace Guild thing where the Wallace family would drive. Lillian, Mrs. Wallace, would drive one weekend, and my dad would drive the next weekend, maybe Peter and Keith and I and my brother. So we would go up to Mammoth and have some wonderful times. Peter was a great enjoyer of life, very much in the mode of Maharishi's model that life is to be enjoyed. And that was always Peter's approach. Life was to be enjoyed, even as a junior high school kid, 13, 14, 15 years old. We would go skiing, and being kids, teenage boys, we would cut up in the back. I remember one trip when Lillian Wallace was driving us, probably anxious to get rid of those 4 boys in the car and get up to the slope so she could have a cup of tea by herself. And she was speeding a little bit. We got pulled over by the cops. So the highway patrol came up to the door of the car and began to speak to Mrs. Wallace. And in the back, we were making remarks like, "What's a penny made out of? Oh, yes, dirty copper," stupid. Not popular with Mrs. Wallace, that's for sure. So after the transition from after receiving the ticket, we headed on. But she was always a wonderful sport, and we always had a great time. And did a lot of skiing all over the Western United States, but mainly up at Mammoth. Long drive, so we spent a lot of time together. At about 16, as Bill was describing, Peter went to Europe and started away from LA, up in Northern California to go to school. And I didn't see him much anymore. I managed to somehow get to India myself and started meditating in 1965. Didn't meet Maharishi, but I met some sadhus who taught me how to stare at a spot on the wall and meditate. So that was very unsuccessful, gave me some really terrific headaches. And so when I got back to the United States in early 66, I heard about, somebody told me, "Oh, there's a meeting for transcendental meditation. Maybe you can go there and learn something." So I went to this meeting. It was a small group, Charlie Lutz, reading the Gita to about 10 or 12 people. And in the meeting was Peter and Keith Wallace. And they said, well, Monty, you got to start meditating. You'll really enjoy it. And it's only 5 introductory lectures. So we eventually started, but the real role Peter played, and Keith also, was to bring to the world Maharishi's sweetness, Maharishi's knowledge, Maharishi's comprehensive evolution for the universe. And his contribution was to be the one who brought to his brother and to LA the knowledge of TM. And even when I was in grad school at UCLA in '67, every week, Peter would be conducting meetings in a classroom at UCLA for all the students who were meditating. At that time, it was a small group. Later in '67, of course, the Beatles started and the whole thing exploded. So Keith and Peter had a massive contribution to the world through that. And I think that we have no idea exactly their role, but clearly their role was cosmic, and one that we can all be very grateful for now and into the future. So, and today it's only 2 intro lectures, so much different. Thanks for everything. It's a joy to speak, and thank you, Bill, for sharing, and thank you, Keith, for the invitation, and love to Peter, on to bigger and better things.
Thank you, Monty. And now we have another dear friend of Peter's who really was a very special person in this world. And she really they were so close. They were like brother and sister. It was such a beautiful relationship that Peter had with Prudence Farrow in those days, and now Prudence Bruns. So, dear Prudy, are you on?
I try. Do you see me? I'm on?
Yep, you're perfect. We see you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you want me to talk now?
Yep.
Okay. Peter, also, like all of you who are here, you know how special he was. And he was to me too. But he was even more than that, like Keith said. He was good friends with my older brother, who was about 6 years older than me. And also Bill also was friends with my older brother. And that the two of them, especially Bill, were sort of at the vanguard of this new kind of thinking that all of us would eventually be engaged in. And I admired that. And in 1966, I was living in Manhattan for a couple of years, and I went out to visit my brother, and he was in Malibu. And Peter came along, and he immediately kind of addressed all the things that had been sort of my quest, which had not been fulfilled at all, my spiritual quest, because New York at that time was not a very spiritual place. And he told me all kinds of things, and I learned TM because he told me all about it. And he told me all kinds of amazing stories. So I was there for a few weeks, and he told me these, he told me about Anandamayi Ma, he told me about the Dande Swamis or sannyasis. He told me about, all kinds of amazing experiences that he'd had, that he'd seen. I mean, it was like magic. I dreamed of these kind of things, but I didn't think they were real. And Peter had all these amazing experiences, and you all know what a great storyteller he was. And so I would just sit and just with my mouth open and just listen to him. I just wanted to hear everything he had to say. He also was able to answer my questions. I had a lot of doubts about the world we're in, about the purpose of existence, all these kinds of questions, which to me at that point, I was just starting my spiritual quest. And to me at that point, I really needed answers. And I felt that Peter, he gave me correct answers, but also I felt he was sort of part of the flow to Maharishi. I felt he was kind of for me. I felt he was sort of sent for me to go through this sort of very elementary kind of experiences of what spirituality is, coming from an unspiritual background. And he was able to really change my life. And for me, that relationship with Peter never really changed. He was larger than life as far as anybody I've ever met, because he introduced me to a whole world of that we're all in. And I felt that, gratitude that you can only feel when you've not had it. And in that sense, my debt and my devotion and love to Peter never changed. Sometimes he'd be annoying, but that was part of the package too. That was part of Peter, because the soul, the Peter there, just sort of blinded everything, like the sun sort of takes out all the color and everything when it's really bright. And he just kind of, it was just who he was. And that was very, very real to me. And all through my life, even though I didn't see him much, life goes on, he was always there for me if I ever wanted to ask a question, or if I saw him on a course. He was always part of my life. And I made some notes here because I wanted to do justice to the relationship I had with him. And I'll tell one experience that I had was, I was there for just 2 weeks, and then Peter had told me about TM, and they were having the second course they gave on TM, the Sims group ever gave on TM at UCLA, and it was 6 weeks long. And so that there were lectures there were 2 a week, and then you learned on the weekend. And so I ended up having to stay that long. And during that time, Peter told me about these meetings with the SRM people, and he spoke so highly of them, and they'd been meditating all these years, which to me was just, like, what could they be like? I mean, they've been meditating 3, 4, and some of them 5 years. It was like, oh my God, what kind of human beings will they be? And so it was a couple of weeks before they would have their next meeting, and the thrill and excitement of meeting these long-time meditators was just building in me and building in me. And Peter's stories, of course, were also getting more and more, out there. And I was really quite a built-up state. And so he's taking me to the meeting. And again, it was kind of like Monty described. It was in a little bit darkened room, and there were about 15 people. They all had sort of straight back chairs. And they were listening to a tape of Maharishi's voice, which at that point, the tape was all scratchy. I mean, they probably understood it, but as hard as I tried, I couldn't figure out a word he was saying. And then what happened is that first, as I walked in the room, I had expected, I don't know what I expected, but I was so excited. And I saw these people, which I didn't expect them to look the way they looked. They had bouffant hairdos, and they looked sort of like the Rotary Club. It was like very conservative. And when I was from the generation that anyone over 30 was clueless, So here were these people that did not look the role I was expecting. And I didn't say anything to Peter really, because I couldn't, it was a silent room and everything. And we sat down, and then Peter turned to me and he said, how did he say it? I wrote it down. He said something like, well, you sure are small-minded. And I didn't know what he was talking about because I hadn't said anything to him about how disappointed I was and all that. And then he said, look, you got to think of it this way. Spies disguise themselves often, but they're still the person they are. You just can't see it. You can't see who they really are. And he was describing these people who he called, these are saints. Afterwards, he kind of was real strict. He said, now these are saints. And you just can't see it. That's all. And that's your problem. So I kind of got a good talking to in that one, because I just didn't expect that you could have all these dementias. I was still very much a 60s person. And then what I'd like to say is that, let's see, there's one other note I wanted to tell you. That actually Peter, which I didn't realize so much, I knew how much he meant to me because he played a role in bringing me to Maharishi and getting me ready to meet Maharishi. He played that role. And but I still, I'd be really excited to see Peter over the years, but it wasn't until we lost him, recently, that I realized how very much he meant to me. And his loss, my loss of him, of course, we know he's gone on to much greater things, but for me, the selfish reasons, he was here in my world and he was taken away. And for me, that was like taking my security blanket away. I lost a lot when we lost Peter. Now, I want to tell you one other thing is that when we were leaving, Peter had told me about all these wonderful books and, autobiography of a yogi, which Bill started in the family, probably moved down, and then it went to me. So I was very excited. I wanted to read that book. And I said something to Peter, and he was dropping me off. He had volunteered to take me to the airport to go home. And so he said, let's go by the bookstore. We have enough time, and let's get autobiography of a yogi. Because Ananda Mayama, apparently there were pictures of her, and Yogananda talked about her, and all these saints and things that he had told me about were discussed in this book. So I was very excited. We went and we got the book, and the guy who was there selling it to me, he gave it to me and he said, now listen, this book is going to blow your mind. And so I was very excited. So as I read the book, it didn't. And the reason it didn't is because of Peter's stories. They'd already blown my mind. Not that he was Yogananda, but the stories were, that big. And so I want to thank you, Keith, and it's wonderful to see you, Bill. I've seen you from a distance because you would come by the house when I was young, and I always admired my older brother's friends and was always curious about them. But thank you very much for asking me to speak about Peter, because as far as I'm concerned, Peter has been one of the, if not, well, one of the most, I'm not talking about Maharishi, but most influential people in my life. And I'll always, always love Peter. So thank you.
Thank you, Prudy. Thank you. And this is Dr. Prudence Bruns, who has her PhD from Berkeley in Sanskrit. So she's a great scholar, too. So thank you. So now we'd like to hear from another great friend of Peter's, Dr. Chris Hartnett. And Chris spent many, many years with Maharishi, very, very close, had a wonderful time, and was a great, great leader in our movement and still is. And he had, a special relationship with Peter. Chris, are you there?
I am. Keith, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Keith, and thank you all. I feel so honored to be part of this distinguished crew. I just looking and listening to Bill and Monty and Prudy, literally each one of them brings tears to our eyes here because at Heavenly Mountain, because they're so profound and they are our saints of the day. And we really thank you for all that beautiful love that you're sharing with us. And I know it's much deeper than just may seem in the words. So we want to thank you all for that. And Keith, thank you for putting this all together. I'm so glad that we had a celebration. Unfortunately, we watched the other service that they had online, and we wanted Peter to be celebrated. So this is really that celebration, and we're so glad to be part of it and to be part of this profound group. I had literally talked for a week about my dear friend Peter, and later Peter, not the younger Peter, but this is the later Peter, and still I would have another 2 weeks to go after that. He was such a kindred spirit for me. And, I'd been at MIU and been a student at MIU long before I met Peter. And we were under the grace and guidance of Keith when we first moved from Santa Barbara to Fairfield. And then one day, somehow I met Peter. And I think all that got out was the fact that Charlie Lutz did my 3 days of checking in the SRM Center in Los Angeles, and that was the end of it. We didn't stop talking probably for a week, literally on and off. And at those days, when I showed up to Charlie, I had long hair and ripped blue jeans and a paisley shirt and sandals. And we really didn't understand what SCI was. We didn't understand the profundity of what Peter and Keith had brought to the world through SCI and the Student International Meditation Society. But we were very blessed through Charlie and all those beautiful days that we had with him. And we got to MIU, and I remember when I first got to MIU coming out of Charlie's world, I drove my SCI teacher crazy at MIU because I wanted to know about angels, we wanted to know about enlightenment, we wanted to know about saints, and we wanted to know about miracles, and we couldn't believe that everybody was wearing ties, and we didn't understand how that would possibly fit into this vision we had of being a seeker and finding enlightenment. And many years later, when Peter and I became very close in Fairfield, and then later, I mentioned SRM and Helen Lutz and the crystals and the gems and Jyotish, and they were all triggers for Peter and wonderful Peter's spirit. And we went off on that. And it was such a big, beautiful part of my life. I had never really met a man up until that time, besides for Maharishi and the great saints, but I had never met a man like me that I felt could understand my inner energy and curiosity and zest for different things and refined levels of glorious creation. And Peter was that. He was my buddy, but at the same time, he seemed to have this depth that I hadn't seen in anyone else in my environment. It was like we got together, we felt like we could make it rain together. We felt like we could move mountains together. And those around us, which I hear of, and my family was all telling me over the last few days of what it was like to be around when we were together, whether it was Heavenly Mountain here or wherever. The real magic was always an underlying goal, but it was there unseen and unsaid, but it was palpable. And beyond, it was way beyond thought, beyond bliss, and not beyond bliss, but it was grounded in that bliss and that love and that joy that Peter just emanated. And as he got older, that's what he did. But he didn't do it in such a way that you might think, where would a saint, someone who was with these great saints at that point in time in his young life, how would that saint become a bigger saint in the relative world? And that always amazed me about Peter, because we translated that into adventure. And to be with him was to be with adventure. Whether we were boating, we did that. We did motorcycles all over the country. We did gem shows. We did Arabian horse shows. I was telling Keith the story earlier today, which we won't tell now, but a great story about Peter and I at an Arabian horse show where we're bidding way beyond our financial means, and the celebrities that we met, and the list goes on. And we'll save those stories for another day. But Peter was that person that loved everyone, no matter who it was, no matter where we were, whether it was at that auction or whatever, he would befriend the people next to him, and they felt this special relationship. And I think every single person on the call tonight felt that specialness that Prudy did so beautifully express. And he had a way of grabbing your heart and bringing you in and making you feel like you were his best friend. And as we see tonight, and unfortunately we can't see the audience there in Fairfield, but I'm sure it's just filled with people who feel like Peter was their best friend. And he had many best friends. It was so beautiful the way he did that. And he was a great man. And I remember he used to always tell me about these people before we met them. And he'd build them up so much, and I was all excited to meet them. And then I would meet them, and because of my level of consciousness, low level, and ignorance, I wouldn't really appreciate them at first. I said, this is the guy he keeps telling me about. This is the guy. This is the guy. But then as I got to know them, I saw their beauty, because Peter had seen it from the very beginning. He had the ability to go to the heart. He was never negative. He was always so beautifully open to everyone's soul as a part of his own soul. And when I got out of the way periodically, I realized the greatness of his friends. And really what I started to learn is the greatness of Peter. He made everyone his best friend if they let him. And that was the thing. You had to let him do that, because we had to get out of the way ourselves. And he was a great toucher of hearts. That's what he was. And he was a promoter of everyone. If you became his friend, everyone else knew how great you were, because he promoted you. And there's so many stories I'd love to tell. The time he had $1 million, $20 million worth of gems strapped to his body as we had to go through security, all types of great things. But the memories of the motorcycles, and Marishi, his past stories, and the present stories that we had to share, and Charles, his son, conquering the Blue Ridge Mountains on motorcycle, and Heavenly Mountain and Fairfield and Tucson and Florida and Scottsdale and North Carolina, Lake Rathbun, Watauga Lake, and so much more. And did he love his children? He loved his two brothers like nothing else. He taught us all how to love our brothers. I have two brothers, and I look at that all the time. It was so beautiful, the love he had for Bill and Keith. It made us all in awe. We love Keith anyway, but when he talked about Keith, he raised them to such a beautiful level. And he loved his children, and he always complained there was never enough time to be with his children. That was the one thing I remember, is he always said, I wish I could spend more time with them. I wish they could be here with us. I wish we could have my kids here. And there was no doubt that he loved and adored them, and he loved to talk about them. And Charles and Ananda and Philip and his other children, Ted and Gareth and Leela, that was so beautiful to watch those relationships and watch how they honored him, honored the stories, honored Maharishi through him, honored Maharishi through their own eyes, and then honored Maharishi again through their lives and how beautiful their lives became. Because Peter truly loved, and we say this, and it sounds almost like it's over and over again, but he truly loved everyone. When he was at his great power, he really loved everyone, and his extended family, his brothers and everyone, but he made you want to be a Wallace. And I can tell many times I said to myself, my God, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of, and when Bill was talking tonight, I felt it again. I would have loved to have been in Malibu during that time. I would have loved to do this in Monty and skiing and Prudy and her life. It was so precious. And a lot of that was because of the light and the fountain of love that was the Peter Wallace that we knew on the relative level. And no matter what experience we're in, even if we'd never been in that experience before, he was always at home. And that was the beauty of it. It didn't matter who it was, whether it was the policeman, whether it was the teacher, whether it was the merchant. We became at home if you were in Peter's presence while he was starting his act to get into the heart of every person he met. No matter who it was, he loved you, and you knew that he knew some expert, whatever you came up with. It didn't matter what we were doing, whether we were boating, whatever the subject matter was. He knew an expert in that, and then he became that. He became that field. He was a student, and he became that field, and then he committed to being an expert. He became an expert, and he was self-proclaimed as an expert. But the cool thing about that was he was such a great student that he had the knowledge and he had the experience to back it up, because he integrated that with Maharishi's knowledge and Maharishi's consciousness. So it wasn't just knowledge on a flat level. It was knowledge that was integrated into the finest levels of creation and integrated into full knowledge. And so Peter was basically a man of Dharma, if I had to think of it. He was a man of Dharma. He was a lifelong seeker. And that was the time, as Prudy expressed, we were all seekers. And Bill sounds like a great seeker as well. You know, we were dharmic disciples, trying to be disciples in a land that didn't have anything like that. And Peter was a dharmic TM teacher. Ultimately, he has the dharma of a saint, and he is a saint, regardless of what people may think relatively. He is a saint. He'll continue to be that saint, and he's blessing us now, and all of us. In our hearts, he's there. And he is a Renaissance man. And I asked my wife tonight, I said, what was Peter to you? But he was everything to all of us, the same thing. And she came up, Linda came up with this beautiful expression of who Peter was. I should have had her write it all down and say it. But he wasn't just that. He was also a great salesman. If he believed in something, he could sell ice to Eskimos. He really could, no matter what it was. And he used to look at my gems and he would sell me my own gems practically. He was such a great salesman. And whether it was art, whether it was gems, whether he was selling TM, who was a better seller of TM than Peter in our generation? None. He was so great at that. And he's a man that knew bliss. He was a man that was bliss. He was a man that radiated joy. And he was part sannyasi, and at times he had the dharma of a very strange and unusual Vedic Swami, deeply immersed in mitigating the karma of the world. And sometimes that meant that by getting into that level, that things didn't seem normal to some people. But that was his beauty. He had the dharma of a man about town, he had the dharma of a Vedic scholar, he had the dharma and a beautiful dharma of a devotee, and he was a good and great and gentle man. You know, it's interesting reflecting on this, especially with Prudy, listening to Prudy, and I think about all those beautiful days that they had in Rishikesh. We've all heard the stories. But the youth of today, in a funny way, they're given spirituality and the potential for self-realization, soul realization on a silver platter. And in the case of Maharishi gave it to the world on a golden platter. And Peter's glorious Keith, together with their great souls, played a huge unseen part in the karmic mitigation and transformation of this planet. And you may think that these are words that are just not meaningful. This is the truth, and I say this from the depth of my being. They played a huge, unseen part in the karmic mitigation and transformation of the entire planet. This may be hard to believe for some, and I just ask you to look deeper. Things are not the way they seem. Now we have a different time. As seekers, we had to dig. We had a mind consciousness, and I remember Monty in the master course, and we're all trying to figure out why this was happening, why Maharishi was doing this, and there was a war going on in Europe at the time. And we had a mind consciousness. We had to work for it. We had to figure out what it all meant, and no one gave it to us on a silver platter. It was not part of our parents' culture, and it wasn't part of our culture outside of India. And then Maharishi came along and did his very best to instantly integrate that into all the lives of everyone on the planet. And we were pilgrims, and Peter was a leader of those pilgrims, and we were most definitely on a pilgrimage. Peter at times was our chief cosmic, whatever you want to call him, tour guide, bringing us back from the extremes of wheatgrass or yoga postures to the practicality that Maharishi expressed of integrating consciousness with simple meditation and basic financial necessities without losing sight of Maharishi's profound knowledge of the basic fundamentals of pure consciousness. That was the common denominator all through these years of Peter's life, pure consciousness. And for some reason, nature grabbed him early, had him at the front of the pack, and led each of us from generation to generation, and much younger people than me, to that pure consciousness. He had front row seats, and because he did, we didn't have to have those front row seats. We experienced it through him. We didn't have to go catch something in India. He went there for us. He was the chief of our pioneers, and that's what pioneers do. They go through it for other people first, and it makes it easier for the rest. But whether it was crystals, whether it was gems, art galleries, storytelling galore, there was no better storyteller in my world, I felt. And when the stories about Ma, we all learned to love Ma because of Peter. All the women of the TM movement loved Ma because they were opened up to Ma. It was so beautiful. And everything and everybody, when you got Peter on a good moment, was beautiful. Every second was beautiful. And you can tell by the way he would talk. He'd never want to say anything but good, no matter who it was. He truly loved life, he enjoyed life, and he sang down the path of enlightenment. Some of us don't do that. Some of us bounce all the way down on our head. But Peter sang down the path of enlightenment. He preserved the seekers an aesthetic experience for the youth of the world. And so on behalf of all those people, Peter, that I was part of, and all my friends and the people that came before and after us, thank you for that. Thank you for showing us what the life of a seeker truly was. Now,
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much, Chris. Beautiful, really beautiful. Thanks. Now we move on to a slightly different phase of Peter's life. Peter was very much involved in art, and that was his, final profession. And his great partner in that was John Werdeman. And John, a very great soul, really wonderful human being. Peter and John would go out sailing. They were, they loved to sail together. They loved to sell art together. So it is a great joy to hear from John Werdeman now.
Thank you, Keith. I was blessed to know Peter during the last 25 years. He was a successful art gallery owner where he insightfully and purposely located his gallery in a seasonal location, allowing him to work about 4 months out of the year and play and pursue interests the following 8 months. He had a rare, keen eye for elevated fine art and built a remarkable personal collection over the time that I knew him. His clients included some of the top art collectors. Many of them he became good friends with. The manner in which he organized his life allowed him to spend a great amount of time pursuing his interests, including long visits with his mother and other family members and friends. He collected and greatly enjoyed riding motorcycles. He was a skilled sailor. He loved sharing his remarkable experiences with others, as other people have mentioned. More than anybody that I've ever met in my life, he had an aptitude for transcending. He loved long meditations. He often participated in month-long rounding courses sponsored by Perusia, and that's where I first met him. And we both sat in the long meditation area, which is where we got to know him. But he closed his eyes and he transcended. And I was blessed being able to meditate with him lots of time in the dome, in his home, at my home, on our sailboats. And I want to share one experience that I had that also gives some insights into Peter. I had at the time, a Herreshoff Meadowlark Ketch beautiful traditional sailboat. Peter liked traditional things. And one came up, a boat like mine came up for sale a few hours away. So we called and made an appointment to go see it with the intention of Peter might be interested in buying it. And we went and we arrived at the marina. We met the lady who was selling the boat, and we went and down the pier, and we saw the boat, and it was listing a little bit, and it had about 2 feet of water inside it when we went aboard. And the floorboards were floating. Obviously, there were major problems with it. And the lady that was selling it was got very upset, and she was in tears. And we invited her. The marina had a restaurant. We invited her to dine with us. And we went in and sat down, and she went on to say that this was her husband's boat. He's recently deceased. She's broke, that the marina bills come up every month, and the marina is supposed to be taking care of the boat, but obviously they aren't. And she lived 3 hours away, and it was awkward, and she doesn't know what she's going to do. And next thing, I see Peter get out his checkbook and wrote her a check for the full amount for the boat. He says, I can handle this burden better than you can. I mean, he bought a sinking boat that he had no idea what was wrong with it and wrote her a check for the full price for it. Because of his empathy and his just feeling that he wanted to release this lady from her duress and take it on. And of course, Peter had great support of nature. He talked to the marina manager. They pulled the boat. It was a minor problem that was fixed. And then he kept the boat in the Chesapeake, and we sailed side by side for many times, and with his son Charles joined us sometimes. Anyway, I thought that story would give an insight into a soul that just was moved and could feel what other people's were feeling so greatly and desired to help it out. And I too, thank you, Keith, for asking me to speak. I spent so much time with Peter the last 25 years and had great admiration for him. We had so many good times together. And like Chris Hartnett and Prudy were saying, all the people that are have spoken so far, Peter talked about in glowing terms to me, just again and again over experiences that he had. So some of you I've never met, but I feel I know you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hi, Kathy. So, and I'd always hear Peter say, I beat John again on that race. We raced and I beat him again. So I'm not sure if that's true, John, but you were his student, and I'm sure you got better than him in the end, but still he loved sailing with you. That was a great joy for him. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to start with some of the children, and I'm going to have all of Peter's children come up, and Philip, his oldest, is going to give a little a more inside view of Peter. So Philip, Charles, and Ananda.
It's really nice to be here with all you people that have known my dad over the years for so long and have really shown your love for him. I just want to say a few words for us, the kids, who had a different experiences with him than, because we knew him on a different level. And most people here know him for his involvement with the Transcendental Movement and his great stories about the early days. And he's just such an amazing storyteller and so enthusiastic. And he was just a real ambassador for meditation and for all the things that he's learned throughout his life. His enthusiasm was just so contagious. And so I'm going to tell you a little recapitulative of his life from my perspective, kind of. So just some history for those of you. There might be some gaps that some people don't really know. So he grew up in LA, and he was surrounded by lots of privilege, and he felt that there was a real emptiness in a lot of mainstream American culture. And he was always searching for more meaning in life. The simple American dream just never worked for him. So he wanted something more in life, and that led him to Paris, where he studied painting, and he was influenced, as Billy said, by existentialism and reading a lot of books and stuff. I know he really liked The Razor's Edge, the story of the quest for some deeper meaning, And this led him to India and eventually to transcendental meditation. And, those experiences that he took with him when he returned back to LA. And, he, through his meditation, he was able to focus more, and he overcame his dyslexia to study and, to do his university and stuff like that. And just share that knowledge. His contagiousness of his excitement introduced Keith and so many other people to transcendental meditation. Around that time, he also met my mom, who she had immigrated from France as a young person. So she grew up in Los Angeles to French immigrant parents. And she had kind of a sheltered life in some ways up to that point. And so meeting Peter, it was just, the world opened up. It was so exciting. They had amazing experiences. They traveled up to Washington State. They traveled in Europe. They traveled in India. And, they just had some great adventures together. In 1970, pregnant with me, they decided to move to New England and started a life with my dad working as an artisan. He did scrimshaw, and he had a shop. He was a storekeeper, and so they sold his work and other artisans' work, and also they imported clothes from Europe, the handcrafted clothes and things like that they sold in their shop in Newport, Rhode Island, eventually. In many ways, my sister and I had a really idyllic life for the first years. We lived. My parents had bought this rambling old carriage house and fixed it up to a really nice home. And there was a huge garden, a huge yard, and everything just, it was kind of a very much more bohemian version of the American dream that we lived as young children. My best memories of that time are sailing with my dad on a Hobie Cat and gardening with my mom, because we had a big vegetable garden, and it was just a really nice time. 1978, my parents got divorced, and we moved into a smaller house with our mom. And we still saw my dad regularly on weekends and stuff like that. And we always made it a point to go to Westport, Massachusetts, for the first 2 weeks of August for a family reunion. And that was with my grandmother, Lillian, who some of you have met here or in various points. And so, that was just such a special time for us and with our cousins. And it was just such a magical experience, a part of and later Charles as well. And we just had some great times there, In 1984, my dad left Newport and came here to Fairfield to do his MBA. So we didn't see him on weekends so much, but he still really made a point of coming out to Westport. I came out to visit him one summer here, and I stayed with Keith and Samantha and my cousins, and we just had some great experiences that summer. It was a really intense summer for us. We had some great times. Then, in 1989, I moved out and lived with him and Heidi and Charles, who was a year old at the time, in Laguna Beach. He had a gallery, and he had a small apartment above there. But, he was always open for, even if it was a cramped space, he made space because, family was just so important. So we had some good times there. It was really nice to connect with Charles, and I would take him out to the beach and, bury him in the sand or throw him in the waves or whatever. And After that, they moved on to Austin, Texas for a bit, and then they got an Airstream trailer, and they traveled around the South doing art shows and art fairs for several years. And eventually they settled down in Florida, where my dad had an art gallery, which he, as John Waterman spoke about, he had a successful art gallery there. And then when he retired, he moved back here to Fairfield. So that's kind of a little, at least from my perspective. I know there's a whole other perspectives on his life, but that's how I kind of think of it. Anyways, I want to talk about his three main passions in life, which is transcendental meditation, sailing, and art. First of all, he loved being on the water, whether it was windsurfing, paddling in a canoe or a kayak, sailing a catamaran, or on the little pond boats in Westport. He had a tugboat for a while in Newport. He loved sailing, when he could get on one of the tall ships that we're visiting, he loved sailing on the tall ships. He was just most at home on the water, especially behind the helm of a boat, because he could really let out his competitive side. He loved racing sailboats. He could just give free rein to his competitive nature. So he always really loved being on the water, and he really wanted to share that. He really wanted to have us be part of that. He always wanted, invite as many people as possible to share his love of the water. Art was it was a lifelong passion for him, and he was always just fascinated by the creative process. He was, an artist. He was an artisan. Jewelry. He made, he always was creating. But also, he was just such an amazing salesman, and he always was able to support other artists. He just loved being around other artists. He sold a lot of works of different sculptors and painters. He was just such a great salesman because he really believed in what he was selling. He was not really a very humble person, but when he was with an artist, a great master, he was completely humbled. He just loved being around the creative process and the respect for the craftsmanship, for their vision, and for the whole creative process. So that was just a really important part of his life. Of course, transcendental meditation is a thread throughout his life that just gave his life so much meaning. He was so passionate about, and he just wanted to share that with everybody that he met. But, he was just torn between part of his life. He just wanted to, go to a cave and meditate and just become a spiritual person. But his love of life and love of people, just made him become this. He was such an extrovert that he couldn't just become a hermit, So his worldliness, his desire to be at the center of attention, his storytelling, meditation, it gave him such peace, and he could meditate, he could, spend that time, and then he would be recharged to go out into the world and just give so much energy. And then later in his life, he retreated more into, quiet contemplation and meditation and stuff like that. And, so it just is something that has given him so much over his life. As a father, he was a really good provider. He was always there to support his family. He wasn't so involved in the day-to-day stuff. He would, let my mom take over most of the day-to-day stuff. But he kind of wanted a buddy. He didn't really want to have a relationship of father-son or father-daughter. He wanted to have a friend to share. He also, though, had a temper, and if he felt like he was being disrespected or that he wasn't appreciated for everything, he could really lose his temper. So, that was something that he always struggled with throughout his life. But the thing is that, if I was ever in need, if I ever told him that I needed some help with anything, he was there for me. And he was not judgmental about me messing up or anything like that. He was just so accepting of everything I did, and he's so supportive. And people have said about his storytelling, he always had the most amazing stories and was so proud of us, And he was a complicated person. He had a strong ego, which allowed him to go through life without any doubt, really. He just kind of barreled through life. And he struggled with his volatile temper. And through meditation, he always tried to make himself a better person and to dissolve his ego, which he never really succeeded in that, But he always did the best that he could, and I have learned to really accept him for the person who he was and to really appreciate him for who he was. So that's, yeah.
Okay, we're all complicated. Isn't that the truth? It's fun to get an honest assessment of all of us. I like it. Peter, better listen. Come on. So now we get to hear a little from our side of the family. So I'm going to ask first Gareth. Excuse me? Ted's first? No, you want Ted first. Okay. Those guys decide on their own. Oh, you're going to come up together. Oh, and Leela, too. Oh, my. Well, they're changing the whole program. Yeah, okay. Take over, guys.
Well, welcome, and thank you all so much for coming and celebrating this incredible life of Peter Wallace. The story that Peter would tell about to me, is when I was like 3 years old, and Marshy wanted Dad and my mom, Barbara, to come to Rishikesh. And so Peter and Nicole took me at that point. You weren't there yet, but you were getting there. And he put me on, the only way he could get me to sleep is to put me on his shoulders and to run around with me and kind of bounce me around. And inevitably, I would lose a little bit I had colic, so I'd lose a little bit on his head. And he said that's why he kept his hair his whole life, And so this is the story that he would tell me all the time. But it kind of sets the tone of our whole life. There's so many things to be grateful to Uncle Peter for, and our amazing cousins who are world travelers and the kindest, sweetest, most amazing people. They carry those qualities of Peter with them, and they give them back to us, and they give them to our children, and their children have all of those qualities. And that's one of the greatest gifts that he gave to our families. So thank you guys so much. And Nicole and Heidi, of course, they all created that together, and that was amazing. Peter gave so many things on the outer and on the inner level. And on the inner level, he, as you heard, he was the kind of guide for our whole family. He came back from India. He got Dad to connect to Marshiji. Our whole lives moved in that direction. And he led that whole thing. And it was an extraordinary blessing. It was an extraordinary, perfect kind of guidance for what we had. And he would have that side of him, this incredible spiritual side. And as everyone said, he would also race Corvettes with us, on the Pacific Coast Highway. So he had these two kind of extreme values, as we were saying. If you get to come to Thanksgiving at our house, it was absolutely amazing because he had incredible stories, and the dad would tell incredible stories, and they would just keep outdoing it and telling better and better stories about. So he had this influence on our life and probably all of our lives to move us in the best direction possible. And even at the end of his life, he taught me some incredible things. Like Gareth and I were there and meditating right after he had passed. And there was this experience that I had when I was in that moment where I could feel that kind of release that happens. And if you see the holy tradition, there's the river that winds through all the different saints, and you could feel Peter's kind of energy and soul like chartering that waters and floating with the saints. And then there's this kind of moment where we had the Vedic ceremony, which was beautifully done. That was 2 weeks ago. And you could feel you could feel his presence. And it's that moment where he taught me, when you actually go, there is some attachment to this vessel that has taken you through this unbelievable journey. And you could feel that he didn't really want, us to kind of let that go yet. And at first I thought he was I couldn't quite figure out how he was so attached to the body because he had had all these unbelievable experiences. But then I kind of felt, I realized he was just honoring that thing. And you could feel he honored it fully. He grieved for his own kind of letting go of that. And then he went to the next level, and you could feel that happen. And so even in this last wave, he taught me again, you got to be ready for these type of things that happen like that. So he is a huge, amazing influence on our lives. And I'd love, if you want to follow. Yeah, good. Come up. Thank you. And you want to say?
Well, I wanted to say happy birthday, Uncle Peter. We love you. Uncle Peter played a big role in our lives. And I wanted to share a few memories. These are tears of happiness, too, because I know he's happy and free of his body. And at the end, he had to go through some trials. And so we are happy to let him go and to be in that freedom and that free space of life, the spirit to be free. One of my first memories was, as Ted mentioned, he would come visit us in L.A. when we were living at the TM Center in the Palisades, Back Pal. And he would drive this super cool white Corvette. And we were definitely impressed by it. And then he would take us down to visit Uncle Bill, and who was living just an hour south. And we'd visit our cousins there, Laura and Sinclair. And on one of those trips, we were going down the highway, and there was a black Corvette. And Uncle Peter loved to fly. He loved the ocean, but he also loved to, drive fast in his cars. And so we had this, it was like, my dream ride, because we were just racing along on this black Corvette down the highway. I think our mom was in the car too. And we're just like cheering him on. And in the end, somehow we went through a bunch of different cars, and at the end we just got off the exit just before the black Corvette, and we were like, yes, we did it. And that was kind of Uncle Peter, in a nutshell, just like the fun and excitement of being with Uncle Peter. As an uncle, he was just, it was a great rush and fun, and we had lots of adventures. I'll go through a few others that were memorable. Another time in Pac Pal, it was a Sunday, and I was being rebellious. I didn't want to, Uncle Peter was coming to visit, but I was rebelling against my mom, and so I went off with a friend. Well, eventually I got rounded up and went with Uncle Peter and Ted on this amazing sailboat cruise, on like a 60-foot sailboat. That was like my first experience that I remember on a sailboat. And Uncle Peter was teaching me to sail. It was like so cool. You know, here I was, never sailed before, and he's out there just totally like he was Captain Peter. He was giving me my sailing lessons, and that was a sweet experience. And then we had many more experiences like that, some with our cousins, with Philip and Ananda, out on the East Coast. Once we moved to Fairfield in '84, which is when Uncle Peter moved here, we moved from California. And then every summer we would spend out on the East Coast because our mom eventually moved out there to Massachusetts, and we would get to hang out with our cousins there. And we had this family property in Westport, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. And there was one trip where he took us out on a sailboat to Cutty-Hung, and that was just the four of us, Philip, Ananda, Ted, and I, just like the dream trip of like on this sailboat. We had it overnight. We stayed overnight in Cutty-Hung on the sailboat itself. Just all these fun adventures he would take us on. And also, you know, Uncle Peter was a spiritual teacher for me. He was my TM teacher for my sitting technique. And yeah, he was very special to us. And we had many different experiences. And he loved, you know, our dad so much. And it was fun being with him on the East Coast because he would just make sure we all had fun together. It was like his joy to take, you know, us and whoever was there, any family, Laura, whoever came out, Leela, you know, Charles, whoever was there on that with that family property, or any time really, but just to have some fun and an adventure, and that was a really special part of Uncle Peter. And I think that captures you know, the love we feel for Uncle Peter. So we're happy for you, Uncle Peter, and we wish you the best out there. We know you're probably back with the saints that you were with at a young age, and enjoying that.
We're almost done. We have a beautiful message from Dr. Tony Nader, a tape from Dr. Bevan Morris, and then we'll hear from President John Hagelin. So why don't we start with it's a very short tape from Dr. Tony Nader, Maharaj, head of the TM movement.
Dear relatives, family, and friends of Peter, I join you in celebrating the life of a dear and much beloved friend to all. I have met Peter only briefly, but I have heard a lot about him and his deep desire for knowledge and growth. I know Peter, however, mostly through his tremendous contribution to our movement by bringing dear Keith and thus his precious family into the programs that Maharshi has offered us all. This by itself is not a small achievement. Keith and his family have been and continue to be a tremendous asset of knowledge and science, profoundly contributing to making life work better for everyone. I am sure those who have known Peter more closely celebrate the many facets of his beautiful life, having touched everyone. May his journey be fulfilling in all possible ways. My sincere condolences and sympathy, wishing the best to all those who loved Peter.
And Jesse, you just go right on with Bevan. Dr. Bevan Morris, our Prime Minister of the global country of world peace and past president of this university. He very, very kindly made a tape. He's in Europe right now, but very kindly made a tape about Peter.
Jai Gurudev. Warmest greetings to Keith and Ted and the whole distinguished Wallace family on this day when we share our sweet and soft memories of dear Peter. I was on the same teacher training course with Peter in Rishikesh, January to April 1969. By March 69, the weather had become hot, and we were coming down in rounds, preparatory to our travel to Kashmir for the final phase of the course to become teachers of Transcendental Meditation. On those brilliant sunny days, many of us on the course would find our way through the jungle to a path down the cliff to a beautiful spot where you could swim in the Ganga. The water was deep and green, and there were rocks to dive from. I clearly remember Peter that day, joyously chatting and swimming. But seeing him that day, at that time, I did not realize that I would not have been there on the teacher training course, but for Peter. His intense aspiration for enlightenment had led him to India years earlier. In this celebration of his life today, it must have been mentioned by many that he came to see the legendary Anandamayi Ma, the greatest lady saint of the modern age, who was Maharshi's great friend. And it was Ma who directed him to come to Maharshi and take instruction from Maharshi. Maharshi, in turn, set Peter on the highest path and to his first plunge into the bliss of the transcendent. To that point in the movement, Maharshi's devotees were from a very distinguished older generation of accomplished professionals and families, but no young men and women. But now, through Peter, and from Peter to a 17-year-old Keith, Maharshi's youngsters began to appear and be initiated and burst out in every direction of expansion of Maharshi's teaching in the world. And eventually, those young people numbered in the tens of thousands of teachers of the knowledge.
And now we'd like to hear from our president of Maharishi International University, the great distinguished physicist, Dr. John Hagelin, one of the all-time important leaders of our movement, who is really taking us to a whole new dimension. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Keith. This has been truly one of the most remarkable, captivating celebrations of a life. I knew much, but not all, of what I heard tonight. I was greatly blessed by Peter's attention on many occasions on many subjects. And I was already aware that Peter was like a John the Baptist for Maharshi to so many of us young people. He brought Keith on, and Keith also brought so many. I'm a little younger than some of you. I was a college freshman, I think, when I was reading Keith's paper in the Scientific American and physiology and all the remarkable attention he brought to samadhi, the gift of samadhi that Maharshi had given him in many And I won't try and expound again Peter's qualities because those of you, many, have spent much more time with Peter than I have. But I must say that, and this has been said in different words, Peter's heart was so sensitized and so full of love and generosity. He would just give of his attention and give of his knowledge and give of his inspiration and give of his stories. He spoke to me a great deal about art because it's an avocation I also enjoy. And it was like speaking to a great artist when you spoke to Peter. His sensitivity to art, he really saw art and he knew art in the same way that he saw Maharshi and appreciated Maharshi's depth. That quality of heart is extremely precious. It's that which really defines the clarity of our experiences on the deepest levels and provides the main conduit through which consciousness flows outward through the mind and senses. The developed heart is a key sign of high evolution. And on that, and in many other regards, of course, Peter's heart was extremely sensitized and very precious. His stories are amazing. I could hear them again and again and again. Imagine a time when you could just go over and find Maharshi in Rishikesh and go visit Ma and be sent by Maharshi to visit Ma and have it a whole big cosmic setup, which of course happened without any verbal communication. How nature organized that meeting and taught a lesson to everybody who was there, the high dignitaries. It was just, Maharshi's magic. I've had the pleasure and amazing privilege of living in Maharshi's home for years with very close interaction. And it's magic. It's all magic. And Peter had that magic and lived it and experienced it with so many great saints, Maharshi first among them, and shared those stories with us. They must be captured. The stories that we have in this group and some others of Maharshi and the extraordinary world that surrounded him are stories we have to capture for our children and future generations. And I'm really hoping that everybody who has these stories will be sure and record them on video. For our students, for example, who have no such experience at all, have never seen Maharshi or spoken directly to him, they need the wealth of these personal experiences because stories have throughout time been a tremendous way to communicate richness of knowledge, a form of communication that everybody gets and loves on a heart level. So let's be sure all these stories are preserved. And with all that has been said with such remarkable eloquence by many, everybody who spoke was just a joy and highly impressive, very articulate. It was really absolutely captivating. I don't need to go on and reiterate those remarkable points in the life of a great saint, a great light, a powerful light from the heart that drew so many and played such a role in Maharshi's connection to the young people of that generation. I don't need to reiterate that, but I would like to ask for your support for an idea that I would like to implement at our university, dear university. I really think for our seekers, who tend to be our students in Maharshi Vedic science, especially our graduate students in Maharshi Vedic science, I really would love to have a scholarship in Peter Wallace's name, a funded scholarship, which would take those people who have Peter's incredible seekership and provide them with support and inspiration to take that knowledge deep and to take it far. It's not a big project. We'll get it done. But I do hope that anybody there who loves the idea of honoring Peter's depth of knowledge and understanding and experience of Maharshi's deepest wisdom might consider contributing to that scholarship. And it would be just a great joy to have a beautiful write-up of Peter's life and anything and everything from this wonderful celebration could be part of that. And just so that his incredible personality and life are memorialized, just as we have with Dr. Vernon Katz in the Veda Bhavan building, with a beautiful poster and beautiful inscription and a beautiful fellowship for that type of deep-seeking young person who, like Peter, will have a great, great impact on the generations to come. God bless Peter. He has brought all of us so much. He's been such an incredible example of a life well lived and well pursued, and for the love that Peter has shared and with so many of us. I wish him, not that it's needed for me, but I wish him, and I'm confident that he is in a very, very blissful place. I think that everybody can feel that very palpably tonight. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this, Keith. Jai Gurudev.
So I just want to make sure that my wife wanted me to say how much she wanted to honor Peter at this time too, and what a beautiful experience she had with Peter over all those years. There's nothing I could say that could, even measure up to what he gave to me. My whole life was really directed, and he gave me Maharishi in the most gentle and kind way. I remember first meeting Maharishi, and Peter introduced me, and it was just, he saw something. He knew there was some importance of my meeting Maharishi, and I had no idea. I mean, I asked the dumbest questions. I was clueless. I had nothing to offer, but somehow Peter just kept pushing me. So I thank him dearly, and thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank you very much. Bye.